It's nice to see so many of you here this afternoon. I'm Jane Vossler, and I want to welcome you on behalf of the Community Senior Center. Thanks for coming. And it gives me great pleasure to introduce Brian Lindner. He's going to tell us all about the CCC in this area.
Okay, well, thank you, Jane. I appreciate being invited to come here and talk. This is an old-fashioned presentation. This presentation I put together back in the early 1990s. It's on carousel projector. And the origin of this is, as you'll see, I grew up in a CCC building. I've always been surrounded by this work that the Cs did. I knew lots of CCCers, the boys, and Chapter 112 of the CCC veterans that used to be in the area asked me to come and give a talk once, and they gave me like 48 hours to prepare it. So I drove around like crazy taking pictures and putting this program together. So this is my personal experience with the CCC, and as you'll see, it relates to projects all around central Vermont. So let's get rolling. We got to back it up to the beginning.
Can we turn it back?
Yep, there you go, just like that. Yep. Okay.
Is that good?
Yep, that's good. This is old technology and it almost fails us. Okay, so my dad was the forest ranger for the Mount Mansfield State Forest in Stowe. He was a World War II veteran, 10th Mountain Division, ski troops, and when he came home after the war, Perry Merrill hired him to be the forester up at the Mount Mansfield State Forest. And in those days, the forester lived in the base lodge. That's where they were stationed. That was part of the job. So I grew up in the Mount Mansfield base lodge. As you'll see, the further end of it was my bedroom. So this building was built by the CCC. It's actually the second base lodge at Stowe. The first one was they had a horse barn when they were cutting the trails, because the CCC cut the ski trails on Stowe. They cut the Bruce first. They started November 1st, 1933. They finished February 1st, 1934. So all summer long, all winter long, they're hiking up, clearing that trail, and they created the first purpose-cut ski trail in Stowe called the Bruce. It still exists, but it's now a backcountry trail. And they were housed in a horse barn. They used to sit about where the photographer was that took this picture, and when the Cs pulled out, they turned the horse barn into, quote-unquote, a base lodge, and that's where the base lodge started at Stowe. Then, in 1940, they built the single chairlift up Mount Mansfield, the longest chairlift in the world at the time, and they realized, well, we have got to have a base lodge to service this brand new lift because we're going to get so many skiers. Prior to this, everybody was hiking up and skiing down, hike up and ski down. So this is the building that they built. It's a log structure. It was designed by an architect. David Freed was the architect that did it, and he did a lot of design for a lot of CCC buildings. And just 2 weeks ago at State Archives, I found the original blueprints for this. And they are beautiful. It's like a piece of art. They should be framed and displayed. So they built the base lodge. They started it in 1940. They finished it in early 1941. And the logs, Charlie Lord, if that name is familiar to anybody, Charlie Lord was the supervisor for most of these details. He told me that they got most of the logs off the trails they were clearing, but they also brought a lot of them from Jeffersonville through Smuggler's Notch and used those to build the base lodge. So that is the original structure that you see right there, completed in 1941. And that's where my dad and my mom lived until the three of us kids came along. The base lodge has grown significantly since then. It's still used as our primary base lodge at Stowe at Mount Mansfield. But like this part of the building right here is now the ticket window on this side. It's the ski patrol room on the other side. That was purpose built for my brother and I as our bedroom. And it's still there. So growing up and throughout my career skiing, riding the lift, people always say, "Oh, are you from around here?" I say, "Yeah, I grew up right here." "Oh, where? Your parents have a second home?" "No, I lived in the base lodge." "Oh, your parents were in the base lodge a lot?" "No, I lived in the base lodge." Oh, so your parents, where were they from?" I said, "Right here, we lived here." And that conversation still happens with great frequency. So we used this area of the building was for family affairs. This was my parents' bedroom. That was the living room. Actually, I have a whole presentation on the history of the base lodge, but we're not going to do that today. What you see going out the other way, the first extension was 1955, the next one was 1965. So we still use that today, and ironically, when this will be my 51st year on the ski patrol at Stowe, when I bring patients down off the mountain, I take them into my old bedroom. So that's me on the left, my older brother on the right, and my grandfather, Claude Adams from Stowe, standing out in front of the kitchen at the base lodge, our family kitchen at the base lodge. Now, my grandfather helped work with the CCCs, but he was never actually a member. He was famous because from 1940 until 1966, anybody walking or driving into the parking lot at Stowe had to pay a quarter, which is in today's money, that's about $5 a head. When Vail started charging 3 years ago, there was all kinds of publicity. "Oh my God, you have to pay for parking." And I was the only one that went back to the reporters and said, "No, we used to charge from 1940 to 1966, so it's nothing new." My grandfather collected that quarter from 1940 to 1966. I remember every night he would come in, give all the quarters to my parents, they'd dump them out on a desk, and they'd be counting quarters all evening. And there were a lot of quarters. I should back up if I can here. So that was our kitchen right in there. And growing up, my mother did all of her cooking on a wood stove. We didn't have a modern stove until I was probably 8 or 9. Now, the Seas did all kinds of projects on Mount Mansfield. Their primary camp for the crew that did this was the 191st Company. Their primary camp was where the swimming pool is in Waterbury at the bottom of the interstate ramp. That was where CCC Company 191 was stationed, and it was known as the Camel's Hump Camp. And they never did much on Camel's Hump, but they were at Stowe all the time. They later moved up to Moscow and had a camp up there that eventually turned into the Von Trapp's music camp that they operated, I think, until 1956. So this is one of the projects that the Seas did, is on the summit of Mount Mansfield, right at the top of our main chairlift, is a building called the Stone Hut. And this is my dad here, George Wesson, 10th Mountain veteran, director of ski patrol at Stowe, later at Killington. Charlie Lord, who laid out all of the trails at Stowe. Dave Burt, another 10th Mountain veteran. These are all guys that they spent every moment they could up on the mountain. And the Seas built this stone hut so that people hiking up would have a place to go in and get warm and change and then ski back down. And the hut is still there. Today it is rented out. It's only available by lottery because it is now so popular. And the last I knew, all the fees collected went to the Youth Conservation Corps to support their efforts. There's a couple of very interesting stories about the stone hut. Jake Burton Snowboards, his 2 boys were in there one night. They had rented it, they'd won the lottery, and they got the fire going next to the wood stove, got it roaring, stacked the green wood against the wood stove, and then went skiing. You can imagine what happened next. We almost lost the entire structure. We didn't. It was saved. It's been rehabbed now. Jake Carpenter paid a lot of money to make things right. So we still have this sitting on the top of the mountain. And one of my stories about this was when I was working for the YCC, one morning my work order said, "Take your crew to the summit and tear down the stone hut." And I looked at my boss and I said, "What's this?" And he said, "Montpelier, the officials in Montpelier are sick of dealing with it. They just want it gone." I said, do they have a clue? And he says, it doesn't make any difference. You got your work order. Go up there and start tearing it down. So I took all these high school kids that were in the Youth Conservation Corps. We went up the toll road, and I sat them down in front of the building on a ledge. And I said, let me tell you about the history of this building we're about to tear down. So I told them about the history of it, and this one girl from Burlington, she looks around, and she says, yeah, I don't think we're going to do this. And everybody else said, yeah, no, we're not doing this. And I looked at him and I said, is this a strike? And they all said, yeah, this is a strike. We're not doing this. I said, okay, let's go trim trails then. So we went out and trimmed hiking trails for the rest of the day. Nobody ever asked me why we didn't start tearing it down. Nobody mentioned my boss, nobody. And it's still there. So all thanks go to her. Oh, I should say, I can't back this thing up. At the stone hut, construction started October 1st, 1935. There had been a wooden structure there for only a year that the Seas built. They took the wooden structure down, they drove it in pieces down around the base of the mountain and re-erected. I'll show you wreckage of it a little bit later. So the Seas then built the campground at Smuggler's Notch that my dad ran for 20-some odd years. And that was the original gate that the Seas built to get into the original campground. Now today, that's the main entrance to the Spruce Peak side of our resort, and it looks nothing like this. This looks today like a huge ski area. In about 2003, 2004, the ski area at Stowe wanted to do a massive expansion that would have encompassed the entire campground. And Hank Lundy, who was then CEO at Stowe, did a lot of negotiating. He negotiated with 49 separate environmental groups and came up with an agreement that the campground would actually be moved down on Route 108 further down the road. And the original campground built by the Seas would be abandoned and become part of our base complex today. I mean, houses there today are like they start at like millions. So part of the agreement was the state or the state and the ski resort had to preserve as much original CCC stuff as they could. So they picked up these stone gates that had been there since 1933 and moved them down, and they're actually, you drive by them now on Route 108 going to the ski resort. It's about a mile from where they used to be. So those were very nicely preserved. The campground, when the Seas did things, you have to understand the CCC was, in a way, was a make-work project. It was a way of keeping young men occupied, and it was only males. And they got paid $30 a month, of which $25 had to be mailed home. You could only keep $5 to yourself. And they had to attend classes. They supposedly were also there to learn a trade. So the Seas didn't do anything half-baked at all. This is how they built tent platforms at the Smuggler's Notch campground. I mean, it's all made out of significant size. These were all cedar. And those still existed when I was a kid. Today, those are all gone. They were gone actually before the campground was moved. But that shows you how much work they put into building tent platforms. So this is the 1973 was the first year of the State Youth Conservation Corps in Vermont. That's actually me there with our crew. This was my boss. And these kids convinced me the value of the CCC because of the work that these kids did. We could go to a trail and throw these kids on a hiking trail, and the quality of the water bars and everything that they did was unbelievable, and they got paid nothing. They were all doing it as volunteers. But when they got done, at the end of the day, they'd look at it and say, boy, we did a nice job up there. And I realized the CCC had the same attitude, and that's why everything was built so well. It's just amazing. From my standpoint, there's only 2 organizations in the federal government where we have gotten more than our dollars bang, and one is the CCC, the other one is the National Archives, which I could tell you about that too. It's pretty amazing. So that's our work crew. These are the kids that said, no, we're not tearing it down. In 1971, I was working for Forest and Parks on a trail crew, and we were sent over one day to the fire tower over in Plainfield on Spruce Mountain. It's one of the few fire towers left in Vermont. And our job was to go up and tear down the old telephone line that the CCC had built up there to the old ranger station that used to be on the top. An amazing structure that the Seas had built up there. I mean, just the stone foundation was pretty spectacular. So we're tearing down the phone line, and we finally reached the top on day number 2, went in the cabin, and there were these amazing bunk beds in there, all put together with wooden pegs, all CCC handmade bunk beds. And I asked my boss on that crew, I said, what are we going to do with the furniture up here? And he says, we're going to burn the whole building. We got to get rid of this place. I said, you're kidding me. And he says, oh, why, you want those beds? And I said, yeah, I'll take those beds. So I spent the next weekend disassembling the bed, backpacking it out. These were my son's bunk beds. He always slept in a CCC bunk bed. Those are today with the Vermont Historical Society. But just the quality that went into these was amazing, and it was on a mountaintop, a remote mountaintop. This is very hard to see here, but this is my son posing on top of the Seas built an incinerator for the 191st Company at their Stowe camp. They didn't want to take anything to the landfill. In those days, you burned everything. So they built this incinerator. Now, he's 6 foot tall. He's standing on the top of it, and you can still see the stones way down in here. This incinerator was massive, and it still exists in the woods. You have to know where to find it, but you can hike in, and there it is. It's so perfectly built. You could actually turn it into a small home. It's that big, and all it was their incinerator. Now, this is, we're at the, up in Smuggler's Notch. The 191st had built a ski dorm up there, and this is where they would bathe at the end of the day. It's called the bathtub. Hard to see in this picture, but it's a natural formation in the stream, and it looks just like a bathtub. Now, having grown up there, I can tell you, you got to be pretty rugged to take a bath in that thing, because the water is cold. The water is deathly cold. But that is still there. You can walk right to it today. Just upstream from that, they had built a dam to supply water to the camp, and these are just all the remains that are left. You can see some of the log cremig, the rocks in there. There's very little of it left today. I don't think I have it in here, but maybe it's coming up. I have a picture taken at the time when they were building this. It was a pretty impressive structure. Nope, I don't have a picture of it. So I talked about the building, the wooden building they had built at the summit of the mountain, and when they started to build the stone hut, they disassembled it, brought it down. They mounted in a plateau above the bathtub, and we played in it as kids. It was the officers' quarters. It had an elaborate set of wooden steps going up to it, and it was isolated from the rest of the camp because it was the officers. And in 1970, the Department of Forest and Parks decided it was an eyesore, so they burned it. So it's gone. It was on this plateau, but you can go in there today and you can still see a lot of the plumbing fixtures and some of the tin roofing still laying on the ground. The Seas also built the picnic ground in Smuggler's Notch. It's the last thing you go by before you start the switchbacks and the notch. This is a CCC water fountain that they built. It's still there. It's still operating. My dad also ran this picnic ground for 20 some odd years. And this one, unlike the campground, nothing has been moved. It's still just the way it was. And look at the CCC fireplaces. Just incredible construction, and they're sitting right there to this day. Now, when they moved the campground, part of it was, the deal was they had to move and save the CCC fireplaces, and they did. There was like a half a dozen of them. They picked them up and they moved them. And my brother and I kind of poke each other in the ribs when we talk about it to this day, because the ones in the campground had all been rebuilt by my uncle in the 1960s. So the ones that they moved from the old campground to the new one are actually reproductions. They aren't the real thing. The real thing are in the picnic ground. But we're probably the only two on the planet that know about it. This was a great picture that was in my dad's photo albums. You can see the sign in the background, Mount Mansfield State Forest. That is no longer there, but most of my life it was there just as you start to get to the ski resort. And this was a CCC dump truck that had tipped over and dumped its load right on Route 108. Nobody was hurt, but pretty cool picture. He also had several pictures of cars that had gone off the road in Smuggler's Notch in the early years. This is the first official trail map once we had a lift at Stowe. This was the 1940-41 season. And I am personally fascinated by it because this is the area that we ski today. This is all ski resort. There's another lift that goes up over here. Skiing began at Stowe over here in what was called Ranch Camp. It was an old logging camp, and that was where everybody hiked into Ranch Camp, then you hiked up the mountain, skied down, and you spent your night in Ranch Camp. Once we built the single chairlift, skiing started migrating north, so that, like I say, today it occupies all of this area up here. That's pretty much abandoned except for backcountry skiers. And the 191st Company, the Camel's Hump Camp from Waterbury under Charlie Lord, 1933, they were sent into Ranch Camp, and they spent that winter, 33, 34, building this. This is the Bruce Trail. And like I say, it still exists. Every winter in Ski Patrol, we go down there and we search for lost skiers, because they start down and then they make a turn and they get stuck out in this area, and then we have to go fish them out. The Bruce Trail was named after Horace Bruce, who was a logger who had logged that whole area back in the 1800s. And the Seas decided to keep his name and attach it to the trail. On the back side, I don't have any pictures of it, but on the back side of the mountain, just this spring, a fellow guided me around over there. He found old CCC telephones still in the woods, still in cast iron phone boxes, that they used those to call in emergencies. And he also found the most amazing 20-meter ski jump I've ever seen. The ski jump itself is gone, but all the footings and foundations are there, and I look at it, and well, Steve and I used to jump. He was a way better jumper than I was. I wouldn't go off this thing. It was so dangerous, because when you get down to the bottom, the outrun, if you don't stop in time, you pile into all kinds of rocks, and just a really nasty landing. But the Seas had built the fire, they had built the fire telephone system, and they also built that big ski jump. I think at the Ski Museum later this year, we're going to do a big presentation on that ski resort that used to be at Underhill on the mountain. So 1936, 37, 38, Al Gottlieb, who was the state forester, was assigned to assist the CCCs in finding projects for them to do. And these toboggan caches were one of the things that they did. All over Stowe, there was almost 40 of these that they built, and it wasn't all on Mount Mansfield, because in the 30s, people weren't skiing on Mount Mansfield by itself. They were skiing on every hill around Stowe, hiking up and skiing down. So they built these toboggan caches all over the hills around Stowe. There's 3 of them that still exist in the woods, if you know where to find them. They're in pretty tough shape. But in those toboggan caches had the first official Ski Patrol toboggans in the United States. And they were corrugated roofing tin bent up in the front with a wooden framework. Those were built by the Seas, and there are 2 of them still in existence. One's in the Ski Museum at Stowe, and one's in the New England Ski Museum over at Franconia Notch. But those are the first purpose-built Ski Patrol toboggans in the U.S. And amazingly, they were still up there in 1996 when we found them and rescued them. That's one of the caches today that's collapsed. This is at Stowe. This is our famous nosedive trail. You can see beautifully located right next to the trail. And that was just uphill from that. This is a sidebar, but just barely uphill from that was a conversation that took place in 1938, March 5th and 6th of 1938 at the National Ski Races, which were being held at Stowe. And a guy named Minnie Dole, who later founded the 10th Mountain Division, the ski troops, had organized the Ski Patrol response for these national ski races. Roger Langley was on the other side of the trail, walked across the nosedive, and said, "This Ski Patrol system you've got at Stowe is amazing. would you think about taking this on as a national effort, and thus became the birth of the National Ski Patrol. And it happened just to the left of where that picture shows there. There's another view of one of the caches. You can see they're in pretty tough shape. They're actually all lined in metal inside, so the insides are in pretty good shape.
What were they used for?
That's where you stuck your toboggan, your first aid supplies, your splints, anything you might need to rescue a person. And I was just recently, actually last week, given a lot of old Ski Patrol documents, and they talked about, because before there were lifts, if you take a toboggan and supplies, mail a list to Luther Booth in Montpelier to tell him what you took out of the cache so it can be restocked. Pretty informal. This is really hard to see, but I've kind of covered it with the other map from 1940-41. All your trails on Mount Mansfield pretty much all started as backcountry skiers. They weren't lift served. Same thing. All right, so that's Stowe, where I grew up. We have one trail at Stowe that's named after the seas. It's called S53, and everybody thinks S53 means there's 53 turns in it, and that myth has come down over the decades. Well, it's actually named after CCC Camp S53, which was the Camel's Hump Camp in Waterbury, the 191st Company. So we still have a trail named after them up there. We also have the Lord Trail, which was named after Charlie Lord, who was the guy who laid out and supervised the cutting of our trails at Stowe. Now, his boss was Perry Merrill, Commissioner of Forest and Parks. In the day they finished cutting the Lord Trail, they were trying to figure out a name, and Perry Merrill said, "We're naming this after Charlie Lord." And Charlie said, no, don't name it after me. And Perry Merrill said, "I'm commissioner, we're naming it after you." So come forward now to 1936, they're cutting a new trail out on the shoulder of the mountain, and when they got done cutting it, Charlie said, "This is now the Perry Merrill Trail." And Perry Merrill says, "No, it's not." And Charlie Lord said, "Yes, it is." And to this day, we have the Charlie Lord Trail and the Perry Merrill Trail, two CCC guys. Now, speaking of Perry Merrill as commissioner, he was so far ahead of anybody else, it's amazing. Perry Merrill doesn't get enough credit in Vermont. When it became evident that FDR, President Roosevelt, was going to create this thing called the CCC, every state was allocated a specific amount of money in the budget based on their population. Perry Merrill went down to Washington and specifically lobbied on behalf of Vermont. Now, I just learned this last year from Marty Podscotch, who will finish a book on the CCC in Vermont next spring. It'll be out next spring. And he said Perry went down to Washington and lobbied one-to-one, face-to-face, and he said Vermont ended up with more money per capita, the largest percentage budget of any of the states. And they then had all this money, and that's why they did so many projects in Vermont. Our state park system, our hiking trail system is largely responsible from work of the CCC. Now, at the flood of 27 that devastated all of central Vermont, or most of Vermont, and they decided that one of the projects to take on for the seas would be flood control throughout the Winooski River Valley. And there was supposed to be a large series of dams. Only 4 ended up being made, but this was one here. President Roosevelt approves Waterbury Flood Control Dam. This becomes the largest CCC project in the United States, right here in Waterbury, Vermont. And if you haven't seen this dam, it's pretty impressive. At the time of construction, it was the largest earth-filled dam in the world. So really, a really significant structure. And this is what the valley looked like before the dam was built. There was a sawmill at the bottom of the valley, and waterfalls here that they took their power from. But because of the hillsides and construction, this is an absolutely ideal position to block all the water coming down from Stowe, off Mount Mansfield, and that whole valley. You could stockpile it here behind the dam, and then later release it to flow down into the Winooski River, thereby preventing flooding. So that's why they chose this location. This This is after they've taken down several of the buildings, but this used to be a small village right here. The valley was another village. It's now all underwater. That's where my mom grew up. This is the first survey crew on scene. This is a CCC, actually Corps of Engineers, and here's that sawmill down there again, and that pesky waterfall over here. And you'll see some pictures of that as we go forward. So in 1933, they're doing the surveying. 1934, they start construction. And this is an earth-filled dam. This is not a concrete dam. This is the opening ceremonies with Governor Smith officiating. There was a gold-plated shovel that I've never been able to find out where that ended up. This is Robert Fechner. That's the head of the CCC himself right there. And you see a pretty good-sized crowd, and now the place that they're standing is now deep inside the dam. This gives you a sense of the valley that they're in. So they start construction, but to do that, they have to have a place for all these men to live. There's 3,000 CCC boys, which is what they were called. Now, the Waterbury camp was a VC camp, Veterans Corps. You had to have served in World War I to be assigned to Camp Smith in Waterbury. This was all veterans. So why all veterans? Well, some of you may remember when they had the bonus marches in Washington, D.C., because World War I veterans were promised that they would receive a huge cash bonus several years after the war, and the government never paid it. So they had these huge strikes in Washington, D.C., most of them put down by Douglas MacArthur and Dwight Eisenhower. But part of the compromise after the riots was that they'd established some camps of CCC that would be just for veterans. So that's what you got at Waterbury. These are not your normal CCC boys right out of high school. This is the school down here, because everybody was expected to take classes. It's an old farm. They raised pigs on it. And if you read through some old journals of the American Medical Association, they had a trichinosis outbreak here that made national headlines. There's medical studies about what happened here. It's online. You can go out there and read it today, but it's a pretty remarkable study. Now, these buildings, you're only seeing the first third of it. The village goes out and curves around out of sight. This housed 3,000 men. And these were temporary buildings. They were intended to be temporary. They are basically tar paper buildings, not insulated and heated by coal stoves. That's the next portion of the village going around the turn. This happens to be the PX, the supply place. If you wanted to buy cigarettes, that's where you went. If you wanted to buy postcards, that's where you went. This is the Little River Road here today. It's still in the same position. All of this is reforested today. But that's Camp Smith. You have to really know where you're looking in there to see remnants of these buildings. Some local folks in Waterbury have reopened most of this, and now Forest and Parks has put up some really cool signs as you walk around here to tell you what you're looking at. It's a nice, easy walk. You can do it in probably a half hour, 45 minutes. This is further down the valley. That's the hospital. Look at the size of the hospital that they had there. Got 3,000 men. Now, I think I have another slide coming up, but you see this kind of gash through the trees? That's the water line coming from two 50,000-gallon mahogany water tanks that are up on the hilltop, and the village was fed by gravity feed coming down through. And some of that pipeline is still exposed today. Gravity feed water. How did they get the water up to those 50,000-gallon pumps? Well, the first thing they did when they moved in, before they started constructing the dam itself, they had to build a dam to hold back the local brook for a water supply for the camp. So this backed up a 5-acre pond. There were big diesel pumps in here, and when the tanks up on the hilltop got low, they would pump water up to the tanks to keep them full. When I was working for Forest and Parks in '68 as a high school kid, this dam was still there. And snowmobiles were new to Vermont then. And we were starting to build snowmobile trails, and Forest and Parks said, well, this is a perfect location to build a snowmobile trail. So this building wasn't here, but you'd come around the corner of the trail and you'd look at this dam. And my crew looked at it and said, well, there's a dam in the way. And our boss said, take it down, take the whole thing down, who cares? And we said, what do you mean? And he said, the trail's going through here, it's already been decided. So we cut out only the absolute minimum we could to get a snowmobile through. Since then, the whole dam has actually collapsed, but at the time we thought we were doing a great thing. This is a little hard to see, but this is the concrete footing that the big diesel engines sat on to pump water uphill to those mahogany tanks. Like I say, if you take the hike today, there's signs. Forest and Parks did a fantastic job of putting signs at all these locations. There's a good overview of all of Camp Smith. As you can see, it's pretty huge, 3,000 men. The library had, I think, 6,000 volumes, which is pretty impressive. They had their own hospital up there. And this blank area here, the parade ground, we're going to talk a little bit about that later. There was a building that sat there that burned Christmas night, 1935, and I'll tell a little bit more about the story. Here is the pond, the 5-acre pond where that dam was that they built to store water, and they pumped it up, and you can't really see the towers up on top of the hill. Well, I got ahead of myself here. Let me back up a second. So when I do talk about the fire, the night watchman saw the fire. He went into the headquarters building right there and said, fire, fire, fire. And then he ran all the way down to here, to the garages, to get the so-called fire truck out. And by the time they drove back, this building was gone, killing 4 men. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that. So they had a competition between the barrackses. Every barracks was trying to be the prettiest possible barracks. Now these were tar paper buildings, temporary shelters, but the flowers and the flower gardens were amazing. And when the local crew was clearing out these trails in recent years, they found something I had never seen before, and they've now exposed it. These guys had built a waterfall that came down into a granite fountain, just really elaborate, and today it's in the middle of absolutely nowhere, just sitting there. And they had found it, it was about a foot down, buried under old leaves and stuff. But they're posing here for some of the competition for beautification of the barracks. There's another view. I mean, look at the flower bed in the middle. That's the library. Pretty impressive library. Now here you see some of the coal stoves. That's how they heated these things. And I'm going to jump way ahead now. The building that burned was the officers' quarters. It was 165 feet by 185 feet. That's where the officers lived. Christmas night, 1935, at 2 o'clock in the morning, they noticed it was on fire. In 12 minutes, it was leveled to the ground. These are not fireproof buildings, killing 4 officers. And I have the complete CCC inquiry, Board of Inquiry into the cause of the fire. And it's really a fascinating read because it goes just page after page after page where one person says the fire started here, the next one says the fire started there, the next one says the fire started there. They talked about, was it a fire from one of the coal stoves, etc. The newspapers are covering something that's never in the Board of Inquiry. The newspapers are all talking about these crappy old stoves bought from the low bidder were very leaky, and they were leaking methane gas because they were also buying soft coal from the cheapest bidder. So it was a recipe for a disaster. And we now know, I don't have the pictures in this slide presentation, but a guy walked into Waterbury Historical Society once, said, my uncle worked at the Waterbury Dam, he's died, here's his photo album. And I'm looking through it, there's 2 photographs of the fire in progress when it starts and about 2/3 of the way through. And you can see it's a methane fire because the fire starts at this end of the building, 165 feet, 185 feet, the fire starts over there and nothing else is burning yet. So it was methane gas in the attics of these places. And those are some of the horrible stoves that they were using coupled with soft coal. Contrary to popular belief, they actually had a bar up there. The local rumor always was the guys wanted to get drunk, they would go into downtown Waterbury. Well, they only sold 3-2 beer, but you could buy beer, cigarettes, whatever you wanted at the local bar right there at Camp Smith. These are how they were housed. These are the barracks. And it's pretty cool because you can take these, a photo like this, and it matches to every other CCC barracks in the United States. They all look the same. All designed the same, built the same, and occupied the same. No privacy. The showers were at one end of the building. There, look at this coal stove in the middle of the barracks. Now, this is Christmas Eve. On a prior year, the boys are huddled around this stone chimney. They built temporary buildings, but the chimney and the fireplace were unbelievably beautiful. I mean, stone mason quality, and 4 of them still stand in the woods up at Waterbury. You can still recognize them from some of the old photos. This isn't a good shot, but this is the biggest one. It just sits out in the middle of nowhere. Again, the C's were learning a trade to do things the right way, and thank God they didn't tear these stone chimneys down. They're pretty impressive structures. For some reason, when they pulled out, they left an old gas pump sitting up there. And today it's in the middle of the woods. There's bullet holes in it where people have shot it, but it's an original CCC gas pump. It was right out there, maintenance sheds. The grease pits are all still there. I don't even know what those are. Okay, I said it was a make-work project. I like this picture here because they're up now working on the dam. They worked on the dam all winters long. Construction started at 34, ended in 38, and they worked through every season. At some point, they even started working nights, so they were working 24 hours a day up there. But this is how they built roads. Again, CCC is a make-work project. You don't need bulldozers and backhoes. You send the boys out with a shovel and a pickaxe, build a road. And that's what they did. Imagine this, the ground's frozen, and they're out hacking and beating on this to try and turn it into a road. And you can see how they've started to clear-cut the hillsides around where the dam is. Now, this is looking on the uphill side of the dam, the Stowe side, looking down at Camp Smith in the distance. This whole valley is eventually going to be blocked by the dam as it goes across the valley. There was a farmhouse there. They used that as the engineers' location, and that's where they worked out of. I think I have another picture here coming up. Shows my mom's schoolhouse. This was the rock crushing plant here. See the trucks coming in, bringing rocks down to the rock crushing plant. And this today is all underwater except Camp Smith. The lake is 6 miles long, so it's a significant lake. This is taking the opposite view. No, this is the same type of view. No, this is opposite view. Yes, got ahead of myself. Here's my mom's old schoolhouse. It was moved from way up in the valley and brought down here, and they used it there. This is the engineers building again. And here's the original road that went from Waterbury to Stowe. The dam is starting to fill up, but when they drained the dam in the 1970s, that road reappeared, and the old culverts started passing water again. And the old bridges were there, a couple of old bridges. Now, this is the pesky waterfalls that they used to power that sawmill. And the locals all told the Corps of Engineers, like, you can't build an earth-filled dam there because the rocks are so porous. There's water coming through there. There's springs underneath there. You can't build an earth-filled dam there. Corps of Engineers, we know what we're doing. So this is them trying to clean out those potholes underneath the waterfall because they're going to plug them with concrete and then build the earth-filled dam on top of it. This is a very telling photograph. You can see what the locals knew. So they plugged those with concrete, those potholes, and then they started building the dam. And it's gravel and it's sand, and all the product came from the valley that is now underneath the lake. They had steam shovels there, and these are all in some of the original photos. It says USED on them big white stencils, USED. Turns out that was U.S. Engineers Department, part of the Army, which we now know as the Corps of Engineers. So this is how they're building the dam. Look at this, a line of dump trucks all day long. You just come in, dump your load and go out, dump your load and go out. Just get these circles going all the time. The rock crushing plant, they're making lots of crushed rock that gets mixed in with it. And this dam eventually grows. It covers 1/4 mile. And I forget how high it is, but it must be like 200 feet high. This is them working at nighttime. They actually put bleachers up so that people could come up and sit in the bleachers and watch the work at nighttime. My mom remembered sitting up there several nights just watching it. Now the dam is getting almost up to height, and they have these half-track vehicles. They're wheeled in the front and tracked in the back, and they're starting to bring in more crushed rock up high in the dam. But look at the face of the dam. Look how smooth it is. Every rock that came in was hand-placed so that the face of the dam would be nice and smooth. I mean, just millions of rocks. To this day, it's incredibly impressive what they did. That gives you an idea of the size of the dam also. I spent days down at the U.S. National Archives, who I complimented a few minutes ago, trying to find the plans for building the Waterbury Dam, trying to find photographs. There are none. I shouldn't say that. There's 6 photographs at the U.S. National Archives of building the Waterbury Dam. Now, the Corps of Engineers came to me 2 years ago asking for help, and I said, I'm going to show you all the steps I went through. You guys will have to see if I missed something. And they came back and said, no, you're right. There are no photos, there are no files, there's no blueprints, there's nothing. And they're looking at a $28 million reconstruction right now, which is why they wanted the plans. Some of the photos that do exist are the inside of the chapel. That chapel was at the CCC camp in Waterbury. And this is the chapel right here. That's another officer's building. That was an old farmhouse. This was the chalet. They built the chalet, the skating rink, and there was a 15-meter ski jump right over here for winter sports. And this was all lit up at night, so CCC camps would have hockey games against each other. They'd have skiing competition. There's the hospital up on top of the hill. Pretty impressive. If you know where to look today in the woods, you can still find the remnants of the old skating rink. That's a nighttime picture from the hospital looking down on the skating rink. See, the chapel is all lit up on the left. Now, the entrance to the chapel, which is another tar paper temporary building, had these incredible stained glass window doors, beautiful doors. And in 1947, when Forest and Parks was tearing down the remnants of these buildings, my dad was working for Perry Merrill at the time, and he asked Perry Merrill, what are you going to do with those doors? Burn them along with everything else. So my dad took both of them, and he hid one at the Moscow Sheds in Stowe, and he hid the other one at the Little River Campground. And when he retired, the one in Stowe had disappeared. The other one, you can't really see it, but it's right there in the picture. The other one still existed. He gave it to me for Christmas one year. I'm out of order here. I'm going to show you a picture of it. So the chapel ended up not being torn down. I shouldn't say that, not being destroyed. It was torn down in pieces and given to the town of Norton. It still is in Norton, Vermont today. It's St. Bernard's Chapel up there. It's just to the right of the road as you're heading up to the Canadian border. So that is a CCC building from Waterbury that survives. There's a couple of other houses in Waterbury that were built using CCC materials from Camp Smith. So there's the door. That was on my study when I had my home. When I sold my home, I donated this to the Vermont Historical Society. Now, back again to the fire. Christmas night, 1935, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's like 15 below zero. But a member of the Veterans Patrol, VP, is out doing his loops around. He sees the fire at the officers' quarters. By the time he can notify everybody and get the so-called fire truck back there, this place was leveled to the ground. And 4 officers died, 3 at the fire. One of them died 2 days later. If you're familiar with Mehurin's Market in Waitsfield, he was a Mehurin. And he's buried right next to the market over in the valley. This guy, his body was found at the, this building was L-shaped. The phone was right here in the middle of the V. His body was found right where the phone had been. The phone operator in Waterbury had gotten a call, and she said you could hear people hollering and screaming, "Fire, fire, fire." So it was probably his voice that she heard on the phone. That's where this is a picture showing what later became the parade ground. They never rebuilt it. They completely sanitized this location. You go up with a metal detector, you can't even find a nail in the ground. But the fire started at that end and at this end at the same moment. Pretty amazing fire. And Waterbury Fire Department could see it glow in the sky before they even pulled out of their station. That's the next morning as they're trying to locate bodies in there. And there was a big discussion, well, how many bodies do we have? And they eventually determined it was 3 in there. One of them was a Norwich grad who had coached their football team for years. He perished in the fire. The 1938, as they finished construction of the dam and the Seas were ready to leave Waterbury, the officers got all together. They bought this beautiful large granite monument, and they put a bronze plaque on it in honor of the 4 guys that were killed in the fire. I remember in about 1962 or 63, the plaque suddenly vanished. Someone stole it. And it sat like this in the middle of the woods for years. When they were doing the last reconstruction of the dam, I talked to Bob Finucane at Vermont Dam Safety, and he said, I think we should pick up this monument, move it out where people can see it, and put a new plaque on it. And between Vermont, the Corps of Engineers, and the contractor doing the work, they made this happen. So today the plaque, I guess I don't have a picture of it, but it's right out next to the road. And Forest and Parks maintains it all, and there's a nice fence around it and such. Franklin Roosevelt visited the dam one time. This is him, you can see his face poking out of the car. This is him up at Camp Smith. His driver, I forget his name now, but his driver was eventually settled in Stowe. You can't quite see his face over here. Eleanor Roosevelt came up also on an inspection tour, but she didn't come to Camp Smith. She went to Camp S53 at the swimming pool. Nobody took any photos. There are no photos of her there. And she was staying at the Richmond House. This is where she stayed, and there's some great photos of her at the Richmond House when the place looked elegant. So here's an aerial photo of when the dam was completed. You can see how it blocks the entire valley. 6 miles of lake goes behind it. Originally, there were 2 gates over here that they could raise and lower to control the water going down the little river into the Winooski. In 1954, they added another 6 feet to the top of the dam and added another gate. That's when Green Mountain Power put in their generating station. And now this is after they've added the next gate, and now these gates are all broken. They can't move, so they're looking at another $28 million fix to get those repaired. And I think that's supposed to start next year. They drained it, no, when they finished the dam, literally the day it was done and they had the dedication ceremony, someone looked down and said, it's leaking. And it was. It leaked from day one. And surprise, surprise, because of the waterfalls that were under there. But the water ran clear. It was always clear, and the state monitored it all the time. And in the 1970s, all of a sudden, sediment started coming through. They said, oh man, now we've got a problem because the inside of the dam is wet. So they drained the dam, much to the consternation of everybody, and the old community that was on the bottom started to reappear. There's old cellar holes there. Like I say, there's culverts and such. And you could walk up and down this thing. And regrettably, I only took a couple of photos. But you could see the old, really the old village that used to be there. This is looking from the Stowe side, looking down towards the dam. Again, there's that road, the road to Stowe reappeared. They completed the dam. They had to tear an enormous piece out of it and do all kinds of high-tech repairs, but they did fix the dam so it does not leak any further. I think that's it? Okay. Whew, I'm done. Any questions or comments?
I have one comment. I lived in Bolton when that was happening,
Yep.
and I loosened my boat up, took the straps off, and tied a rope by a tree so that when the dam went, the boat would drift around to the house and we could get in and get out.
Nice.
But there is a group that did not object to draining the dam.
Yep.
Fishermen.
Yeah.
All that
Yes.
water concentrated all the fish. 25 bass at a time.
Oh, yeah.
One spot. Just
Yep.
keep throwing it out.
Absolutely.
Unbelievable. But
Absolutely.
that was scary when they were doing the work, when the sinkholes were showing
Oh,
in
yeah.
the face.
Oh, yeah. We dodged a bullet.
Yeah.
We dodged a huge bullet. Yes.
Our father worked on the Underhill side,
Oh.
built the Underhill State Park.
Yep.
And one of the questions I was going to ask you, you answered, because I have a snowshoe that a friend made a stained glass window thing, whatever, in. But it's a CCC. I discovered afterwards that it's a CCC 534. And I took pictures of it to
Yep.
show you today. But the question too is, my dad used to talk about building before World War II started, because he was up in Underhill at 18, 19-ish,
Yep.
late 30s,
Yep.
and building a road from the Underhill side to the Stowe side.
Yes.
And I didn't hear you talk about that.
Okay. The road was started. If you're in Burlington, particularly in the wintertime, and you look at Mount Mansfield from Burlington, there's a scar that goes right up the backside of the mountain. That's the CCC road. We reopened it in 1968 for fire control, put in new culverts and stuff. It's really in remarkably good shape today, but that ended where the teardrop trail came down because that's Pearl Harbor. That's where the seas ended in Vermont. The road was exactly like you said. It was supposed to come around into Ranch Camp, where Charlie Lord and his crew were staying when they cut the Bruce Trail. The road was never finished, but backcountry skiers use it all the time. It looks kind of like a road. But that road's remarkable, and the stonework for the culverts, you'd look at it and say, you'd pay $1 million for that kind of stonework, and it's still there. Before you leave, let me show you some pictures of the ski jump over there. Yeah. Anything else? Sir?
Off the subject a little, but did they have CCC for women?
No.
Not at all.
Nope. Nope, they blew it. They blew it. In the YCC, when I was in the YCC and today, it's probably 50-50. And like I say, we get a tremendous bang for the tax dollar. It's unbelievable how much work these kids do for next to nothing. It's remarkable.
I have one question. I've been told that the Grand Teton Dam was built at the same time.
Could be.
Is that true?
Probably.
And it went. It broke and flooded and
Yeah,
killed
I don't know
20
much about it, but the Seas was 1933 to 1944. So if it was built in that time frame, it could be, yep.
people. But this one was bigger than the Grand Teton Dam.
Bigger earth-filled.
Yes.
Earth-filled, yep.
What are the plans for the Waterbury Dam next year?
The last I knew, Senator Leahy had secured enough money that they're going to go up and fix flood control gates. I don't know if they're going to remove them or what the plan is, but I heard it was $28 million.
And how many years? of having-
Well, I think they're supposed to start next year. How long it's going to take, I don't know.
Yeah.
But right now, the dam can't function for flood control because they can't close the gates and leave them closed. So,
So is the Youth Conservation Corps the precursor to today's VYCC?
same thing.
Same thing.
Same thing, yep. At one time, there was a federal and a state. I think they're kind of merged now, but I don't know that. But I know when I was in the Youth Conservation Corps in Vermont, we had competitions against the Fed kids that were down at Derby, or Danby. So, anybody else?
So, 2 years ago, the July 10 flood, at one point, There was a phone call from a long-forgotten source now saying that they were about to open the gates at that dam.
At Waterbury?
Yeah,
No way. No, they're stuck. They can't move them if they wanted to.
so it leaves you wondering who is making official phone calls with news like that, or if they meant some other dam and just got the name wrong. I don't know.
I couldn't tell you. We live in the world of conspiracy theories these days. Yeah. Okay. Well, again, thank you for, oh, sir.
Is the Wrightsville Dam in Montpelier area, is that part of the CCC?
That was CCC, yep. Yep, the East Orange Dam, the Waterbury Dam, Wrightsville, there's a total of 4. I can't remember where they all are. But, yep. All right, well, thank you, I appreciate it.